The photograph came into my possession through an estate sale in Vermont. I specialize in Victorian photography, particularly carte de visite portraits and early studio work from the 1850s through 1870s. This image immediately caught my attention, not because there was anything obviously unusual about it, but because of the haunting quality in the faces of the family members depicted. The photograph showed 8 people arranged in a formal studio portrait. A middle-aged man standing in the center back, flanked by 2 younger women. In front of them sat 3 girls of varying ages, and on either side sat 2 older women holding small children. The studio backdrop featured an ornate painted archway, and the composition was typical of high-quality portrait work from the Civil War era. The mounting card was embossed with the photographer's mark, J.W. Black, photographic artist, Boston, 1862. I knew J.W. Black's work. He'd been one of the premier photographers in Boston during the 1860s, known for his technical skill and artistic compositions. This was clearly a professional, expensive portrait, the kind a prosperous family would commission to commemorate an important occasion. But something about the central figure troubled me. A girl of perhaps 8 or 9 years old sat in a chair directly in the middle of the composition, her hands resting unnaturally on her lap, while the other family members showed the typical stillness required by long photographic exposures of the era. This child had a different quality. Her face was slightly blurred, as though she'd moved during the exposure, except that wasn't quite right. The blur was too uniform, too deliberate, and her eyes. Even through the aged sepia tones of the photograph, her eyes looked different from the others, flat, absent. I purchased the photograph along with several others from the same estate. When I got home and examined it more closely under magnification, I noticed something written on the back of the mounting card in faded pencil. The Witmore family, Boston, May 1862. God forgive us for what we have done. That inscription sent a chill through me. I'd seen enough Victorian photographs to know that unusual inscriptions often indicated post-mortem photography, the practice of photographing the deceased, particularly children, as a final memorial. But post-mortem photographs typically showed the deceased alone, or held by family members, arranged to look as though they were sleeping. This appeared to be a standard family portrait, except for that inscription, and that child in the center, with her strange, flat eyes and too perfect stillness. I began researching the Witmore family of Boston. It took several weeks of digging through census records, city directories, and newspaper archives, but I eventually pieced together their story. The family had been prosperous merchants. Jonathan Witmore, the man in the photograph, had owned a successful dry goods business. His wife Sarah had died in 1857, leaving him with 6 daughters. The 2 older women in the photograph appeared to be Sarah's mother and sister, who had come to live with the family after Sarah's death. I found the names and birth years of all 6 daughters: Elizabeth, born 1841, Catherine, born 1843, Mary, born 1849, Hannah, born 1851, Sarah, named for her mother, born 1853, Grace, born 1855. 6 daughters, but there were only 5 girls visible in the photograph, if I didn't count the 2 small children being held by the older women. Unless, I counted again, more carefully. The central figure, the girl with the flat eyes and unnatural stillness, appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old. In 1862, That would make her birth year approximately 1853 or 1854. Sarah, the fifth daughter, had been born in 1853. That would make her 9 years old in 1862. I searched for more information about Sarah Witmore, and I found her death record. Sarah Witmore, daughter of Jonathan and Sarah Witmore, had died on April 12, 1859. She was 5 years old. The cause of death was listed as scarlet fever. Sarah had died 3 years before this family photograph was taken, but she appeared in the photograph, sitting in the center position, the focal point of the entire composition. I examined the image even more closely. The other family members all showed the subtle signs of life, the slight tension in posture that comes from holding still for a long exposure, the micro-expressions in their faces, the natural shadows that fall on living flesh. The girl in the center showed none of these things. Her posture was too perfect, too still. Her face had no tension, no life, and the shadows on her face and clothing fell at slightly different angles from everyone else, as though she'd been photographed at a different time, in different lighting, and then somehow incorporated into this family portrait. I contacted a colleague who specialized in Victorian post-mortem photography and photographic manipulation techniques. I sent her high-resolution scans of the image. Her response came 2 days later. This is one of the most sophisticated examples of composite photography I've ever seen from this period. The central figure has definitely been added to the image from a separate photograph. Look at the chair she's sitting in. It has a slightly different grain structure than the rest of the image, and her dress shows none of the subtle movement patterns you see in fabric worn by living, breathing people holding a pose. But here's what's truly remarkable. Whoever created this composite went to extraordinary lengths to make it look like a single exposure. The lighting has been matched perfectly. The focus and tonal range are consistent. And the positioning is so careful that it's not immediately obvious this is a manipulated image. Someone wanted this to look like Sarah Witmore was actually present with her family in 1862, 3 years after she died. This wasn't just a memorial photograph. This was an attempt to recreate a family as it should have been but wasn't. A family complete, with all 6 daughters present, even the one who died. I kept researching. I found more information about the Witmore family in Boston newspapers from 1859 to 1862. After Sarah's death in 1859, Jonathan Witmore had commissioned an elaborate marble monument for her grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery. The inscription read, "Our beloved daughter Sarah, taken from us too soon, forever young, forever loved, forever missed." In 1860, Jonathan had remarried, a widow named Rebecca Harrison, who brought 2 young children to the marriage. That explained the 2 small children being held in the photograph. And in early 1862, just months before this photograph was taken, Jonathan's eldest daughter Elizabeth had become engaged. The wedding was planned for June 1862. I found a social notice in the Boston Daily Advertiser from May 1862. Mr. Jonathan Witmore of Beacon Hill has commissioned a family portrait from the noted photographer Mr. J.W. Black in preparation for the wedding of his eldest daughter, Miss Elizabeth Witmore, to Mr. Thomas Cavendish. The family portrait will include all of Mr. Witmore's daughters, ensuring that the family will be complete for this joyous occasion. All of Mr. Witmore's daughters, including Sarah, who had been dead for 3 years. I found one more piece of the puzzle in a letter preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society's archives. The letter was from Catherine Witmore, the second oldest daughter, to a friend, dated June 1862. Father insisted on having dear Sarah included in our family portrait, though it troubled us all greatly. He paid Mr. Black an enormous sum to achieve the effect he desired. Mr. Black used an earlier photograph of Sarah, taken perhaps a year before her death, and through some process I do not fully understand, he made it appear as though she were sitting with us in his studio in May. The result is both comforting and deeply unsettling. When I look at the portrait, I see my family complete, all 6 of us sisters together, as we should be. But I also see the truth in Sarah's face, in her eyes that do not quite focus as ours do, in the way she seems to be both present and absent simultaneously. Father keeps the portrait displayed prominently in the parlor. He speaks of Sarah as though she were still with us, as though the portrait has somehow brought her back. Rebecca is troubled by this, as are we all, but we say nothing. Father's grief for Sarah has never fully healed, and if this strange, impossible photograph brings him comfort, who are we to object? But I wonder what Sarah would think if she could see what we have done. Have we honored her memory, or have we committed some terrible transgression, forcing her image to remain with us when she should be at rest? I sat with that letter for a long time, thinking about Jonathan Witmore's grief. He'd lost his first wife. He'd lost his young daughter to scarlet fever. And when it came time to commission a family portrait for his eldest daughter's wedding, he couldn't bear to have the portrait show only 5 daughters when there should have been 6. So he'd paid J.W. Black an enormous sum to create something that shouldn't have been possible, a photograph showing his dead daughter sitting among her living sisters, present for the family portrait, even though she'd been in the ground for 3 years. Black had done it by using an earlier photograph of Sarah, taken sometime in 1858 when she was 4 or 5 years old, and creating a composite image. He'd photographed the family in his studio, leaving a chair empty in the center. Then he'd carefully exposed that section of the plate again, using Sarah's earlier photograph, scaling and positioning her image so that she appeared to be sitting in the chair. Part of the family composition. The technique was sophisticated for 1862. Composite photography existed, but it was difficult to do well. Black had been a master craftsman, and he'd created a seamless image that looked like a single exposure, except for those telltale signs that only became visible under close examination: the different grain structure, the slightly off shadows, the too perfect stillness, and those eyes. Those flat, dead eyes that showed no life, because there was no life to show. Sarah had been dead when that earlier photograph was taken. No, that couldn't be right. She'd been alive when the earlier photograph was taken, in 1858. But by the time Black incorporated her image into the 1862 family portrait, she'd been dead for 3 years. Was that why her eyes looked so wrong? Because Black had taken an image of a living child and turned her into a ghost, inserting her into a photograph where she didn't belong, making her present at a family gathering she could never attend. I examined the faces of the other family members again. They all looked uncomfortable, tense in a way that went beyond the usual stiffness of Victorian portraiture. Catherine, who'd written that letter, stood behind the empty chair, where Sarah's image had been inserted. She looked down, her face troubled. Elizabeth, the bride-to-be, stared straight ahead with an expression I could only describe as haunted. They all knew Sarah shouldn't be in the photograph. They all knew what their father had done. And judging from Catherine's letter, they all felt the wrongness of it, the sense that they'd committed some transgression by forcing a dead child's image to remain with the living. But Jonathan Witmore, standing in the center of the composition, looked directly at the camera with an expression that might have been defiance, or grief, or both. His family would be complete for the wedding portrait. All 6 daughters would be present, even the one who existed only as a carefully crafted illusion. I contacted the Vermont Historical Society and donated the photograph, along with all my research. It's now part of their collection on Victorian memorial practices and early photographic manipulation. The inscription on the back still haunts me. God forgive us for what we have done. Who wrote it? Jonathan Witmore, consumed by guilt for forcing his dead daughter's image into the family portrait. One of the daughters, troubled by their father's inability to let Sarah rest in peace. Or J.W. Black himself, disturbed by what his technical skill had made possible. The photograph remains a masterpiece of early composite work. It's also a document of Victorian grief, of a father's desperate need to have his family complete, of the lengths people will go to deny death's finality. Sarah Witmore sits in the center of the portrait, surrounded by her living family. She's 9 years old forever, captured from an earlier photograph when she was 4 or 5, and artificially aged, positioned, manipulated to fit into this 1862 composition. She's there, but not there, present but absent, visible but dead. Her flat eyes stare out from the photograph, seeing nothing because there was never anything to see. She's not really in the studio with her family. She's in Mount Auburn Cemetery, beneath that marble monument her father commissioned, beneath the words, "Forever young, forever loved, forever missed." But in the photograph, she sits with her family anyway, because her father loved her too much to let her go, because grief and money and technical skill conspired to create an impossible image, because sometimes the dead can be brought back, not in reality, but in silver and paper and carefully composed light. The family portrait from 1862 shows 8 people, 7 who were alive when the photograph was taken, and 1 who had been dead for 3 years but who appeared anyway, inserted into the composition by a skilled photographer who charged an enormous sum to perform what must have seemed like magic or blasphemy or both. Sarah Witmore, dead at age 5 in 1859, sits with her family in a photograph taken in 1862. An impossibility made possible through grief and art and the strange alchemy of early photography. God forgive us for what we have done. They brought back the dead, if only in an image. They created a photograph showing a family that didn't exist, 6 daughters when there were only 5 alive. They forced a dead child to be present for a family portrait, to sit in a chair in a studio where she'd never been, to look at a camera with eyes that had been closed for 3 years. Was it love? Was it grief? Was it a refusal to accept loss? Or was it, as the inscription suggests, something that required forgiveness, a transgression against nature, against death, against the proper order of things? The photograph doesn't answer these questions. It only shows what it shows. A family gathered together in 1862, complete with all 6 daughters, even the one who died 3 years before. Even the one who shouldn't be there but is, trapped forever in that impossible portrait, brought back by her father's grief and J.W. Black's technical skill. The child in the middle who died 3 years before the photograph was taken. Present anyway. Forever 9 years old. Forever in that chair. Forever staring at the camera with those flat, dead eyes. Forever the center of a family portrait that never should have existed but does. God forgive us for what we have done.